is Bill Butler. I am the president of the Black Rock Historical Society. I welcome you to our 2020 speaker series. Black Rock Historical Society is chartered by the Regents of the University of the State of New York as an educational organization where we celebrate and preserve the story of historic Black Rock and the continuing history of our Northwest Buffalo communities. I wish to thank our speaker series program manager, Janine Barron, for organizing this year's agenda of interesting and thought-provoking speakers. Thank you for joining us, and I encourage you to check our website and our YouTube channel for a complete list of speakers. We are sorry you cannot be here with us, but please feel free to email your questions and comments to us. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker for today's presentation, Mr. Robert Jones. Mr. Jones is a counselor for the Cattaraugus Territory and represents the leadership of the Seneca Nation of Indians. Mr. Jones is an ancestor of Horatio Jones, an important intermediary between the Seneca and the Haudenosaunee in their negotiations with the young United States government. We welcome Counselor Robert Jones.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Janine, for the invitation to present some information here today. This is Horatio Jones's actual stomping grounds. I'm pleased to present some information that may be of interest to some, maybe not to all, but I have followed this for since about 2001 when I came across a book that is actually at the Buffalo Historical Society, and it's publication 6. And I bought a copy of the book online. It's called Captured by the Indians, and it says the seldom told stories of Horatio Jones and the Benjamin Gilbert family. Luckily, I was looking at old manuscripts and stuff online, and I did find an older book, which apparently would belong, as I see it, because it has a receipt in here dated 1894 by Charles Jones. I have to assume that this is his old book. He would have been the son of Horatio Jones from his third marriage to Elizabeth Starr. And it was a great find. My wife ended up making it my early Christmas present because it was a lot of money. But there is some old stuff in here, and it's just an amazing book. And it only has the life of Horatio Jones in here, so I'm assuming that he probably made this book himself. But there are some interesting notes and letters in here from the author, George Harris. I couldn't believe it had all this stuff in there. There's a letter in here dated October 16th, 1886 from George Conover, a contemporary of his. I keep this in my safe. I don't usually bring this out, but it's here. And I just thought I'd share that with everybody. Horatio Jones was of Welsh descent, born in Downingtown, Pennsylvania, November of 1763. He was the son of William and Elizabeth Hunter. Hemophilia was one of those things called the royal blood disease. It ran in his family. It runs in some of my cousins today. I've never researched that royal bloodline, but apparently I have heard rumors that if you are from Welsh descent, that people who are associated with the churches and that you can actually do your genealogy all the way back to Adam and Eve. And I thought that was interesting. He was also a descendant of the Reverend Malachi Jones. He was one of the first Presbyterian ministers there in Philly, who emigrated to America and settled in Abington, PA, 14 miles north of Philadelphia. A short story with that is I went with my father and my brother once. We did find the cemetery where Malachi Jones is actually buried. It's still there. They didn't move him. I mean, it's right there, and the Presbyterian church is right across the way. It was an amazing feeling to do your genealogy and to find your ancestors that way. I thought that was awesome. At 16 years old, Horatio Jones joins the Bedford Rangers, performing services as a scout. He was mandated by his father not to go in the upcoming excursion that he was enlisted to do. It was at that point that subsequently Horatio Jones was captured by a war party of natives and taken to Canandaigua, which was the location of the western door of the Senecas in that area along the east bank of the Genesee River. The book says he was a perfect specimen of a vigorous, helpful youth with light complexion, ruddy cheeks, gray eyes, and hair tending to auburn, a color greatly admired by black-haired savages. I don't know if you guys can see it, but I have green eyes. My brother has green eyes. My oldest brother has blue eyes. I've got cousins who have light eyes. Light eyes run in the family. Not so much the red hair, but light eyes do run. And I got to tell you, it is. I used to live out west on a couple different, when I was growing up, at a couple different times. And I don't know if you know how difficult it is to try and convince a classroom of your peers that you're an Indian when your last name is Jones and you have green eyes. It's not that easy, but it's the fact. Horatio was adopted after running the gauntlet to the longhouse door by corn planter's sister. And I can't find her name in the book, but she was born at Avon about 1744. Horatio essentially replaces this woman's son who was lost in a previous skirmish or battle, and he got killed. And that's something that a lot of people don't realize, is that the Iroquois in general, although there were plenty of battles and wartime is wartime, sometimes and a lot of times people were actually adopted in to a clan of the Iroquois, to a nation, to replace the loss of a provider or a woman, and they were adopted in. And this is how Horatio actually came into the Seneca tribe. He learned the Seneca language quickly and interpreted for Red Jacket. He was at many Seneca/Chinusio and Six Nations councils. He actually interpreted for Red Jacket, like I said earlier, I believe. And there's a reference in the book about how he was familiar with George Washington. The book reads that Horatio Jones personally met George Washington can hardly be doubted, though no documentary evidence is known. He is said to have dined with the president on one occasion, in company with Tall Chief and a considerable deputation. In due course, Tall Chief kindled the peace pipe and passed it to Washington, who tried unsuccessfully to draw smoke through the long stem. It was then handed to Horatio Jones, who succeeded better, who then returned it to Washington, this time for a successful whiff. I don't know if you guys realize that recently we obtained back the tomahawk that George Washington presented to Corn Planter. I'm not sure if it's the same tomahawk written about in this book, but I tried to get it here today and it just didn't work out. I wanted to be able to show it to the camera because 1792, that is an awesome artifact that needs to be talked about more, I think. There's also another reference in here within the book that basically says the same thing. It says that Captain Jones was known to General Washington as early as 1790, is well established, but through what means or when Washington first learned of him, we have not been able to ascertain. So no, there's no pictures of him shaking hands with George Washington or anything like that. No portraits, but I like how the book references the fact that General George Washington had to have known Horatio Jones. I think that's awesome. Horatio and another interpreter, Jasper Parrish, received 2 one-square-mile tracts of land along the Niagara River for their service and goodwill. This is kind of a lengthy story, but what I have here, up in the upper, as you're looking at it in the upper left-hand corner, is the Jones tract. That's just right down the road. We're at 1902 Niagara Street. Hurl Avenue is just up the street here. Past that would be where the Horatio Jones line begins. It ends about over there by the Chevy plant on Vulcan Street, right about in that area. I was lucky enough to obtain a map of this. It's in the Atlas Maps of Buffalo at the clerk's office, and I was able to obtain that. And that kind of spells out where his property is, as well as Jasper Parrish, who was the owner of the southern portion of that tract. I will read what the book says on that. And this is interesting. It says, the Senecas wished to give Horatio Jones and Jasper Parrish a substantial proof of their friendship and goodwill. This motive brought them together at Geneseo in the year of 1798. The occasion proved to be of lasting importance in the history of Buffalo. The principal speech at this council was made by Farmer's brother. As interpreted, signed by the chiefs present and submitted to the legislature for approval, it ran as follows. Brothers, as you are once more assembled in council for the purpose of doing honor to yourselves and justice to your country, we, your brothers, the sachems, chiefs, and warriors of the Seneca Nation, request you to open your ears and give attention to our voice and wishes. You will recollect the late contest between you and your father, the great King of England. This contest threw the inhabitants of this whole island into a great tumult and commotion, like a raging whirlwind which tears up the trees and tosses to and fro the leaves so that no one knows from whence they came or when they will fall. This whirlwind was so directed by the Great Spirit above as to throw into our arms 2 of your infant children, Jasper Parrish and Horatio Jones. We adopted them into our families and made them our children. We loved them and nourished them. They lived with us many years. At length the Great Spirit spoke to the whirlwind, and it was still. A clear and uninterrupted sky appeared. The path of peace was opened, and the chain of friendship was once more made bright. Then these, our adopted children, left us to seek their relations. We wished them to remain among us and promised if they would return and live in our country, to give each of them a seed of land for them and their children to sit down upon. They have returned and have, for several years past, been serviceable to us as interpreters. We still feel our hearts beat with affection for them, and now wish to fulfill the promise we made them and reward them for their services. We have therefore made up our minds to give them a seed of 2 square miles of land, lying on the outlet of Lake Erie, about 3 miles below Black Rock. Beginning at the mouth of a creek known as by the name of Scajaquada Creek, running 1 mile from the River Niagara up said creek. Thence northerly as the river runs 2 miles, thence westerly 1 mile to the river, thence up the river as the river runs 2 miles to the place of beginning, so as to contain 2 square miles. Brothers, we have now made known to you our minds. We expect and earnestly request that you will permit our friends to receive this our gift, and will make the same good to them, according to the laws and customs of our nation. Why should you hesitate to make our minds easy with regard to this our request? To you it is but a little thing. And have you not complied with the request and confirmed the gifts of our brothers, the Oneidas, the Onondagas, and Cayugas to their interpreters? And shall we ask and not be heard? We send you this, our speech, to which we expect your answer before breaking up our great council fire. This speech, that's the end of that by the chief. This speech has been much admired and deserves to be for its strength and metaphor. But more than that, it adds to the annals of Buffalo as signal and instance as may be found in all history of the high-mindedness and rectitude of the red man. The Senecas, at any rate, were glad to reward faithful service, and their spokesman on this occasion was one of the noblest specimens of his race. The tracts of land which the legislature confirmed to the interpreters in accordance with the wish of the Senecas have borne the names of Jones and Parrish from that day to this. They were laid out by the Surveyor General of the state in 1803 and formed the irregular northwestern corner of the city. Both tracts are part of the mile strip, the Parrish tract being the southerly one, its south line following the Scajaquada and its north line running from the Niagara just above the mouth of Cornelius Creek to near the west end of Race Street. Uniformly on modern maps and usually in land descriptions and title searches, the name is printed Parrish, but wrongly so, as numerous autographed signatures of Jasper Parrish prove. In 1824, Parrish sold a strip across the northerly side of his grant, 172.46 acres to William Byrd, and you'll see within the map that the Byrd tract is also identified. And this has since been known as the Byrd Farm. The Jones tract extends from the northerly side of the Parrish tract, running back 1 mile from the river to what is now the southeast side of Riverside Park, along Esser Avenue and intersecting lands between Doyle and Wiley Avenues. The irregular extension of the city limits northwesterly from the Jones tract is bounded by a continuation of the northwest line of Riverside Park to an intersection with the easterly line of the mile strip. This old state reserve, the mile strip, is responsible for many peculiarities in the map of Buffalo. So that's how the Jones, and I couldn't believe what I was reading. Here we have a non-native adopted by the Senecas, and he served as interpreter to Red Jacket. They adopted him, and they were more than willing to allow him to have so much say and so much authority within the nation that he was able to actually receive a seat of land for him by the Senecas. I mean, I think that's something fantastic to say about the Senecas. Of course, it's all on condition. If you read about the great law of the Iroquois Confederacy, when visitors come in and people are adopted, you still have to basically swear an oath that you will do things according to the nation you're in. You don't bring any of your outside influence in. You don't try to influence people with outside political anything. You do things where you're at with the Senecas. And he did that. He must have been doing it very nicely for him to be able to receive a seat of land. I believe Horatio did a great job negotiating treaties in light of the fact that the new American government was formed and would obviously want to expand westward sooner or later. Horatio interpreted for Red Jacket, I've said that 3 times I think, Red Jacket constantly stated to missionaries who wanted to convert Senecas and natives in general that this land, or what we call Turtle Island, was given to us by the Great Spirit. Red Jacket responds to the Reverend Cram at Buffalo Creek, and I'll read just a portion of that because I think that's something that needs to be made known to a lot of people who want to learn this stuff. And keep in mind, Horatio Jones is interpreting for Red Jacket. Brother, listen to what we say. There was a time when our forefathers owned this great island. Their seats extended from the rising to the setting sun. The Great Spirit had made it for the use of Indians. He had created the buffalo, the deer, and other animals for food. He had made the bear and the beaver, their skin served us for clothing. He had scattered them over the country and taught us how to take them. He had caused the earth to produce corn for bread. All this he had done for his red children because he loved them. If we had some disputes about our hunting ground, they were generally settled without the shedding of much blood. But an evil day came upon us. Your forefathers crossed the great water and landed on this island. Their numbers were small. They found friends and not enemies. They told us that they had fled from their own country for fear of wicked men and had come here to enjoy their religion. They asked for a small seat. We took pity on them, granted their request, and they sat down amongst us. We gave them corn and meat. They gave us poison in return, alluding to ardent spirits liquor. The white people had now found our country. Tidings were carried back, and more came amongst us. Yet we did not fear them. We took them to be friends. They called us brothers. We believed them and gave them a larger seat. At length their numbers had greatly increased. They wanted more land. They wanted our country. Our eyes were opened and our minds became uneasy. Wars took place. Indians were hired to fight against Indians, and many of our people were destroyed. They also brought strong liquor amongst us. It was strong and powerful and has slain thousands. Brother, our seats were once large and yours were small. You have now become a great people, and we have scarcely a place left to spread our blankets. You have got our country, but are not satisfied. You want to force your religion upon us. Brother, continue to listen. You say that you are sent to instruct us how to worship the Great Spirit agreeably to his mind. And if we do not take hold of the religion which you white people teach, we shall be unhappy hereafter. You say that you are right and we are lost. How do we know this to be true? We understand that your religion is written in a book. If it was intended for us as well as you, why has not the Great Spirit given to us? And not only to us, but why did he not give to our forefathers the knowledge of that book, with the means of understanding it rightly? We only know what you tell us about it. How shall we know when to believe, being so often deceived by the white people? Brother, you say that there is but one way to worship and serve the Great Spirit. If there is but one religion, why do you white people differ so much about it? Why not all agree, as you can all read the book? Brother, we do not understand these things. We are told that your religion was given to your forefathers and has been handed down from father to son. We also have a religion which was given to our forefathers and has been handed down to us, their children. We worship in that way. It teaches us to be thankful for all the favors we receive, to love each other, and to be united. We never quarrel about religion. Brother, the Great Spirit has made us all, but he has made a great difference between his white and red children. He has given us different complexions and different customs. To you he has given the arts. To these he has not opened our eyes. We know these things to be true, since he has made so great a difference between us and other things. Why may we not conclude that he has given us a different religion, according to our understanding? The Great Spirit does right. He knows what is best for his children. We are satisfied. Brother, we do not wish to destroy your religion or take it from you. We only want to enjoy our own. Brother, we are told that you have been preaching to white people in this place. These people are our neighbors. We are acquainted with them. We will wait a little while and see what effect your preaching has upon them. If we find it does them good, makes them honest, and less disposed to cheat Indians, we will then consider again of what you have said. Brother, you have now heard our answer to your talk, and this is all we have to say at present. As we are going to part, we will come and take you by the hand, and hope the Great Spirit will protect you on your journey and return you safe to your friends. At the end it says this: As the Indians began to approach the missionary, he rose hastily from his seat and replied that he could not take them by the hand, that there was no fellowship between the religion of God and the works of the devil. That's kind of an eye-opening letter that I'm familiar with. And I thought it was important to read that so people could get it in their minds of what the dynamics were at the time when people were signing treaties, and what the talk was and what the thinking was at the time of the signing of all these treaties. Horatio was likely to have known about the subject of taxation and land deeds and titles, and so along with Red Jacket always promoted the island lands here were always meant for our use and ours as stewards. Keep in mind, as I opened up, Horatio's family are the first Presbyterian ministers of Abington, Pennsylvania. I think he would have known about this idea of what recently Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, and amongst Indian country and natives in general, that's kind of a somber thing to look at, because she ruled in 2005 that the Christian doctrine of discovery applied to the case over in Oneida, City of Sherrill versus Oneida Indian Nation. And that doctrine basically says that Indians are not humans. They're nothing more than animals. We can take their land. We can do what we want with them. Something that I have always wondered, if I could shoot back to, the 1700s, 1800s, I would have liked to have been standing next to my grandfather, Horatio Jones, and listening to the governmental personnel and the officers in charge of negotiating these treaties, because as I understand it in contract law, there has to be a thing called full disclosure. Did they fully disclose that they were saying, okay, we're going to sign treaties with the Senecas, and we're going to take this land and you can have that, but that's really not what's going to happen. We're going to come back after you, and because the Christian doctrine of discovery has been in effect since the 15th century. I don't think there was a whole heck of a lot of truthfulness and honesty at the time of the signing of these treaties, and I think that's a shame. But can it be worked out? I like to think so. I mean, I do a lot of research, and this subject of Horatio Jones and the treaties has always been something that I've been interested in, so I look for things all the time. Now, I've already read a portion of the response to the Reverend Cram at Buffalo Creek. I would also like to read a paragraph out of a report from 1857 I found while researching in New York City. I was down there working. I'm an iron worker by trade, and I was working there, and I used to commute over to Central Park. Across from Central Park is the New York City Historical Society, and I went over there, and I sat down at the library table and asked for any information they had on the Senecas. The lady came back with this report. And it's an awesome report. Documents and official reports illustrating the causes which led to the revolution in the government of the Seneca Indians in the year 1848, and to the recognition of their representative Republican Constitution by the authorities of the United States and of the state of New York, printed by William Woody and Son, 1857. This document is actually a document about how they confiscated about, 6,000 acres of Cattaraugus and Allegheny land for what they said was like back pay or taxes for the roads and bridges that they put in on the reservation. John Luke, within the report, was actually the Seneca Nation president at the time. He actually writes a memorial letter to the state and to the U.S. government, to the Department of Interior. The Department of Interior now comes up and does an investigation, trying to figure out what happened here. In the end, the feds, George Moneypenny was the guy who signed this report from the Department of Interior. In the end, the state of New York was made to give back the land they confiscated from the Senecas, all those acres of land from Cattaraugus and Allegheny Reservation, because it was in violation of the supreme law of the land, the treaties. And I think this one paragraph sums up what actually happened. And I'd like to read it for you now. It says, from a careful examination of the several treaties heretofore made with the Senecas, and decisions of the highest courts of this state and of the United States, your committee are clearly of the opinion that the Senecas do not hold the title to the Cattaraugus and Allegheny reservations under the state of New York, nor under the United States, but their title to the same is original, absolute, and exclusive. Original, absolute, and exclusive. And as the Senecas are not citizens of this state and have no representative in our legislature, we can claim no right to tax them. They are rather to be regarded as a distinct and independent nation, having a constitution and representative government of their own. That is strong language. Now, this was in 1857. Powerful report. Some people say it's antiquated. Oh, something had to have changed since then. So I went researching. And I went researching recently, and I came across another document, which is, these were the hearings before the United States Senate back in the late 40s. This hearing was to implement several bills. One was to confer jurisdiction on the courts of the state of New York with respect to offenses committed on Indian reservations within such state. A bill to provide for the settlement of certain obligations of the United States to the Indians of New York, and another bill to confer jurisdiction on the courts. Amazingly enough, when I went through here, there is a statement made by Henry S. Manley, Assistant Attorney General of the state of New York. And I will read, we can't read the whole thing. I'm sure you're getting tired of me just reading from a book. But let me read just this much, please, because it is applicable here. He says, now keep in mind again, this is the Assistant Attorney General for the state of New York. He says, in the course of my activities, I have been on all the reservations in the state of New York and have had occasion to deal with quite a number of problems relative to them. I have found in presenting cases relative to the Indians before the Supreme Court of the United States and elsewhere that there is considerable difficulty in getting understood the situation in the state of New York because it is so different historically and in other ways from the Western reservation situation. He says, it is necessary to remember that the reservations in the state of New York have never been owned by the United States. That is some powerful stuff. I mean, we could go on and on about this in that direction, but I think you're getting the point. The lands of the Seneca have always been theirs since time immemorial, and we have been promised. Horatio Jones, I'm sure, was promised by George Washington himself, that if there's any encroachments on our lands, that the U.S. government would help us, prevent that. And in this case, from the 1857 report, they did do that. They came in and made the state of New York, who was mistaken in their law, that they thought they could come in and just take land, they were made to give it back. Back to Horatio Jones. Horatio Jones was married 3 times. His first marriage in the book, it says only to an Indian consort. That's my line. I come through William Jones, the Seneca. The second person he was married to was a woman by the name of Sarah Whitmer. She was captured by a war party of Indians. His third marriage was to Elizabeth Starr, and that's what I pointed out earlier. I believe this book is owned by Charles Jones from that third marriage. Something I'm going to treat you guys to something that you have never, ever heard of. I am certain of this. And that deals with Horatio Jones's marriage to the second wife, Sarah Whitmer. Bear with me again. I'll read from the book, but please, if you can, buy the book. Go out and get it. Research this. I invite you all to do this research because this is something you have never heard. I guarantee you, but it's going to come out bigger and better. Sarah Whitmer was living down near Washingtonville, PA. I know where it is because as an iron worker, I worked at Washingtonville doing a powerhouse over there. And then I had this book. I went to look for the place and I found it. I forgot to bring my little memento from that actual site where Sarah Whitmer was taken captive. It was a stone I got, a piece of limestone. The owner said, take it. I've got that. I forgot to bring it. But let me read this. Her father was a guy named George Whitmoyer. But the story relates in this book. It was Easter morning. The Whitmoyers awoke unconscious of the terrible danger that menaced them. Two girls, Catherine and Anne, aged 14 and 12, started out before daylight to secure the sap flowing in a sugar bush. Philip, the eldest son, partially dressed, was kneeling on the hearth of the great fireplace, endeavoring to kindle the smoldering embers into flame. Suddenly the door was thrown open and a yell rent the air. The half-dazed boy turned his head to learn the cause, and as he glanced over his shoulder, the painted form of a half-naked savage with uplifted tomahawk met his horrified gaze. Mr. Whitmoyer, comprehending the situation, sprang out of bed and reached for his rifle to shoot the intruder, who stood for one moment undecided whether to strike the father or son. But a shot through the half-open door stretched the brave pioneer lifeless on the floor. Before Philip had time to move, the keen tomahawk of the savage was buried in his brain. His scalp was torn off and his mother tomahawked in her bed. Meeting no resistance, the savages searched the house and secured Sarah, age 17, Mary, 10, Peter, 8, George, 6, John, 4 years, and an infant. Taking such plunder as they desired, the Indians emptied the beds upon the fire, and the humble homestead was speedily enveloped in flames. The smoke from the burning cabin and the whoop of the savages warned the children in the sugar bush of the loss of home and relatives. Realizing that their own safety was threatened and that they were utterly unable to render assistance to the dear ones, they hastily concealed themselves. Knowing that an avenging force would speedily follow them, the savages gathered up their plunder, thrust each captive child upon a horse in front of a warrior, and hurriedly retreated northward. The children, being mounted, were saved the fatigue of travel, and the Indians were thus enabled to journey at a more rapid rate than was usually maintained in a retreat with prisoners. The eldest girl, Sarah, or Sally, as she was familiarly called, had secured the babe at the death of the mother, and clasping it close in her arms, soothed it to rest. When placed on a horse, Sally still held the child, which became frightened and began to cry, whereupon the Indian with whom they were riding struck it a heavy blow that only increased its cries. Becoming enraged, the savage seized the child by one of its feet, swung it about his head, and brained it on the nearest tree. Sally struggled to save the babe or to rescue its lifeless body hastily thrown upon the ground. She received brutal warning to desist if she wished to escape a similar fate. For the sake of the other children, whom she considered her own charge, she stifled the agony in her heart and endeavored to obey. Being well mounted, the Indians pushed forward, distancing any pursuers and making only the briefest stops until they passed the borders of New York. Then they halted for a rest and assembled in council to settle the fate of their captives. It being the policy to increase their numbers by prisoners, especially by the adoption of children, Mary and Peter were assigned to their Mohawk captors and taken to Branchtown at Niagara. George and John were claimed by Senecas, who had established homes at Tonawanda, while Sarah was separated from the others and sent to a family living at Little Beardstown. The reason that's so amazing, and it's something that needs to be more put out there, is because based on my genealogical research of that portion of this book, Sarah, the name was anglicized later and became Whitmer. Sarah was the sister, obviously, and I just read it, to a guy named Peter Whitmer Sr. I made a connection, and it still needs more research, but I can't undo what I found. I can't get it out of my head. I can't find documentation to disprove it. Peter Whitmer was the same person where the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was organized. It was his farm where they organized on April 6, 1830. And I have a copy. If anybody's ever had Mormon missionaries knock on your door, they all have a ton of these books. In the front of that book, basically are the testimony of the 3 witnesses, the testimony of the 8 witnesses, and the testimony of Joe Smith himself, who actually found, according to this, I'll just read this part. Joseph Smith quotes, as the angel that appeared to him to told him where this gold Bible was, he said there was a book deposited, written upon gold plates, giving an account of the former inhabitants of this continent and the source from whence they sprang. He also said that the fullness of the everlasting gospel was contained in it, so on and so forth. Peter Whitmer was actually a Mohawk Indian. Sarah, his sister, ends up marrying Horatio Jones. And here you have the connection. Something that needs more research. You have a Seneca connection with a Mohawk. Now, we're the older brothers around the fire. We're keepers of the western door. The Mohawks are keepers of the eastern door. This is something I'm sure you have never heard of before in your life. I want to share that I've always somehow known that there's evidence and things that exist to help people like the Senecas. And you're finding out now through the study of what they call geomantic lines and other archaeological evidence, that there's things that people can't explain, but the Senecas have ties to it. When it comes to Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the Christian doctrine of discovery, I would have to say that based on the fact that this Book of Mormon is now here today because of the help of a Mohawk Indian and Horatio's wife Sarah, I would have to say that the Christian doctrine of discovery is probably out the window at this point. The way this book is structured, with the testimony of the 3 witnesses, testimony of the 8 witnesses, and the Joseph Smith himself, that's 12. It's my understanding that if this book was ever presented to a court of law, including the Supreme Court of the United States, that it would have to be accepted as evidence. What kind of impact would it have on the Christian doctrine of discovery? Well, this book that was found in Seneca Territory basically states that a man named Jesus Christ himself appeared in a city called Bountiful, an ancient city somewhere here, and appeared to a number of people there. What does that do to the Christian doctrine of discovery? To me, it simply means it's the same person. They used the Christian doctrine of discovery to basically take the lands of the natives. But after this book came, certainly there's evidence now that exists that it's the same God that they were using to justify taking the lands. So there's definitely something here. I'm not trying to convert anybody. I'm not trying to tell people how to live. I like the evidence. And yes, it kind of overlaps at this point, but I enjoy that very much. And I think there's something here. I think the Mormons, and you're going to hear about this because I will contact them. I have already, to confirm the genealogy. I have not received any answers in the last 5 years. They will not confirm that that genealogy is real. Although I did, when I first got the genealogy in 2001, I went to a website called lds.org, and the genealogy was right there within a couple years. I listed all the names of the kids and their ages. It all matched up. I couldn't bring that today because I couldn't find it. I have mounds and mounds of paper laying across my whole house. I couldn't find it, but I will post it when I do get it. So I think there's something here. Horatio Jones was sent at a time when the whirlwind was just wreaking havoc with the earth, and there was wars, and the English were fighting against the French, and the Germans, and everything was going crazy here. I think we have a situation where the Senecas can beat the Christian doctrine of discovery. And I'd like to leave with you just that thought that that's something that I'm going to pursue further. Maybe in the future I can give you an update if you guys want to have me back. I expect an uphill battle, definitely. I don't expect anybody's going to want to believe what I just read, but whoever views this video, you're probably the first person to hear somebody like a Seneca Indian like me, a tribal counselor within the Seneca Nation, to point this out to you. I think you're going to see a lot of amazing things happen in the next year or two, and things that will just really boggle the mind as far as evidence for the Senecas to have their own land. With that, I think it's been 35 minutes. There's other stuff I have, but I appreciate the time given me. I hoped I did have a story for the creation story of the Senecas, also written by Horatio Jones, as the birthplace of the Senecas at the head of Canandaigua Lake. I can save that for another time, but thank you so much for inviting me here to present some information, and I hope you didn't fall asleep.
No, thank you, Robert. It's very, very interesting.
Thank you very much.
I do have one question on the eventual disposition of the Jones tract. How did that change from his ownership? What was the next?
My research, as I did it in the dungeon over at the Erie County Clerk's office, was that I believe he sold it to Samuel Southard, the Secretary of the Navy, in about 1816, I think was the date that he sold it. There's question there as to whether or not that would have been in violation of the 1790 Non-Intercourse Act, because it had no federal approval. Right. And, every treaty apparently needs federal approval, otherwise it's not supposed to stick. Right. But that's what I know about what happened to that tract. I'm not sure if it was the whole 640 acres or if it was a portion, like Jasper Parrish sold 172 acres of his, and it's now called the Bird Farm. I'm not sure if it was partitioned out or not, but I would have to say there's something there to look at as well.
Again, thank you very much.
You bet. Thank you.